You're listening to the Not Just Numbers podcast, a conversation with mathematicians on their work and their lives to get to know them and discuss common biases and misconceptions. Hi everybody, and welcome to It's Not Just Number. Today we have a special episode with a guest from far, far away. As usual, with us there is Anna.
Hi.
And next to us, there is Brendan Kelly, the director of Introductory Mathematics at Harvard. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, so great to be here.
This is one of these episodes in which I really don't know anything about our guest. And so I would really start with that. Can you tell us a bit who you are and what do you do? We say it, explain it like I'm five, but think about people that do not know mathematics but would like to know more about you and the mathematics you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I'm a math teacher. I work with my students to help them better understand mathematics and how they can use mathematics to step up to their interests and aspirations. But I also do more than that. I also design the curriculum, so the material that the students are engaging with to experience mathematics, and also the instruction, helping our graduate students and postdocs become more successful instructors. So, overall, I think of myself as a teacher, but I also think about how do I help others become better teachers, both through the curriculum, the materials that we have students engage with, and the ways in which the other instructors in my department teach mathematics.
I see. And how did math interest you from a young age? So how did you get into math?
I always loved math, see it as a puzzle, something to figure out, and just this tension between, knowing that the answer's out there and not being able to resolve it in the moment. And then that amazing moment when it all comes into perspective is just a rush. So, in high school and middle school, I loved mathematics. I also saw it as a way of knowing, just this idea that you can really feel confident in the result. And that confidence is so satisfying. And so I went to university to be a math teacher. But this love of math just grew and grew and grew. And so I thought, well, no, I actually want to be a professional mathematician and, get a PhD in mathematics. And it's been a ride. And now I'm back to being an educator. So it's an interesting journey how it all happens.
Yeah, I'm wondering, because when you're researching, often there isn't this confidence. I mean, you're roaming around endlessly searching for some results. Was this in any way a turning point for you to go into teaching more?
No, yeah. I mean, it is true. It's like the moments of confusion grow longer and longer as you continue in mathematics. So in a PhD, you have long stays in confusion as you try and resolve problems. That wasn't really what changed my mind. What changed my mind was volunteering in a local middle school during my PhD. It opened up my eyes that educational experiences are not uniformly distributed in our country. So some people might have access to very rich mathematical experiences, things that light their minds on fire and help them build skills. And other students would be in classrooms where the mathematics just was flat and not really propelling them forward. And so seeing that firsthand, I thought wow, we have a system level problem here. That combined with thinking about how can I contribute to our society? And, I think there are great contributions of proving theorems and doing research mathematics, but I also, saw that I could be contributing as an educator and changing how students are experiencing mathematics. And ultimately, I thought that would be more rewarding. And, I'll never know the counterfactual, but it has been a really rewarding path.
And you mentioned having this experience in a middle school. Why didn't you choose to pursue teaching in middle school or high school?
That is a very challenging job. I have the most respect for middle school and high school teachers. I think in general, we have, at least in the US, we have some system level problems about the support that teachers receive. And I want to support those teachers and help them, but I'm not sure that I'm set up for success for that. There's just so many other factors that go into teaching in the middle and high school that I think would require a lot more training for me to get it right.
I mean, that's very, very interesting. I actually feel that this same issues, a bit more structural in support teaching, but also in the challenge of educating young and very young people, is widespread all over the place. I don't know too much about the Netherlands, but I remember it from England and from Italy for sure, for example. And also this variety of experience going from flat to very challenging and engaging, right? I think part of my love for mathematics come also from the teachers I had that could show their enthusiasm for the subject. And if you don't get that, I think it's much harder to get this sparkle lighting.
Yeah, I mean, I think teachers have had a huge impact in my own trajectory, and there's clear research that a good teacher can propel a student forward. So being part of supporting teachers and enriching that system is really important to me.
And it's beautiful to hear your enthusiasm when you talk about this. I would like to ask you also, on the mathematical side, was there something that really excited your interests, that made you want more of the mathematics when you were studying it? Especially when you moved from high school to university, where the type of mathematics changes quite drastically, at least here.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that fascinated me in my PhD and at university was whenever two branches of mathematics became interfaced with each other. So I studied geometric group theory in my PhD, and I loved how knowing something about the geometry of a space that a group acts on, like this algebraic structure and the way it's able to describe a geometric space was just fascinating for me. It's like these bridges between worlds and how they can create connections for you and illuminate things that might not seem like there's any way to really get a handle on it. And if you kind of shift your perspective, then all of a sudden things become clear.
Which year was this? I presume this was in university.
Yeah, so this is like maybe my junior or senior year at university. Mm-hmm. And just like these connections between the two worlds of geometry and algebra were always so exciting for me.
I have the same experience. I was also wondering, because we mentioned this disconnect between high school mathematics and university mathematics, did it meet your expectations, the math you encountered at university?
I think in part it did. I had a geometry class in high school, and my geometry teacher was one of these people who was able to spark the interest, right?
Amazing, yes.
Yeah, and proof was a central feature of the class, and it wasn't just two-column proofs, which are a common pedagogical technique in the United States. It was really like helping us think through the argumentation and the claims and warrants of these theorems, and that then the transition to university was quite smooth. It's been interesting. That's a very pure math. Now, as an educator, one thing I'm trying to do is think about the mathematics that people need to step up to their interests, broadly speaking. And that might not always be proof or the mathematical research community's standard of what mathematics is. Like, mathematics is this very broad endeavor of trying to describe the world. And for many of our students, that isn't kind of what would empower them. And so I've now had to transition to like understanding applied math and the application. Application is just a little more nuanced and complex than proving theorems, because there's so much uncertainty in there. And so like figuring out how to deal with uncertainty and make assumptions is a new way of thinking. And so maybe that has not met my expectations. Like this change from proof to modeling has been a lot of work and rewarding but unexpected.
I'm curious to get back to this later, but before moving there, I would like to ask you also, what about the non-mathematics part of your life? So what do you do outside mathematics?
I love cooking. Cooking's a great, satisfying endeavor. You get to make a beautiful meal for friends. So that's a wonderful thing. The theater is a great place. I love how, people's stories can kind of share a part of your own life, and seeing that on stage unfold is always so exciting. I like pickleball, which is a new and upcoming sport in the United States. I don't know if they...
What's that?
Yeah, it's like tennis. It's played on a smaller court, though, with a different ball and different racket.
I think here we know it as padel.
It's the one
Yeah.
with the glass walls where you can also use the wall, or
Is
is
that
something
true?
else?
No, there's no glass walls.
Oh, okay.
It's like a little wiffle ball that you play with. It's fun. It's a fast-paced sport.
It's different than I thought. Okay.
Yeah, I played tennis in high school, so this is like lots of tennis players are now pickleball players.
We usually get this a couple of years later, so maybe in a couple of years from now it will
Yes.
be all over the place, new fields popping out. Thanks a lot.
I think I recognize a pattern. There's many people who like to cook. Is there a certain cuisine that you are into?
You know, I love trying new recipes and thinking about a full menu. And to me, it's the food, but it's also the friendship of like sharing a meal with somebody and like bringing friends together, and the whole evening and engineering that is like just like for me something that's so fun and special. Yeah.
That's great. That's great to hear.
Yeah, the convivial social part of food.
Yeah.
That's the best of it, I agree. Good food and good company. So let's get back to what you were saying about this shift from maths to applied mathematics. And I'm really curious about something. I was thinking mathematics, if you wish, is a language, right? It's a language shared by many sciences, including mathematics itself. And as a language, you can study it and look at it from many levels. Like a linguist would study Italian, English, or whatever is their language, trying to understand the roots, try to understand how the words are combined, where they come from, how they will evolve. Somehow this looks like more the job of general mathematics, going very deep into the language and develop the language further. But then everybody else is going to take this language, shred it apart, and model it on whatever their needs are. It might be model it to make art for poetry. It might be use it to transmit emotions. It might be use it to tell a story. And then in some sense, this would be the applied math, where you take this language and just take what you need from this language to study the problem you want, to say what you want. I don't have much of this experience with applied mathematics and modeling, so I'm curious if this actually fits as a metaphor, at least with the experience of looking at both.
Yeah, I mean, I like this metaphor of language. Like, it is a way to communicate with others about what we're seeing in the world, and a way to distill key features of the world into into a language in which it's not just about describing, but we can also then take action. We can reformulate, and we can calculate, and we can gain insights. And so there's something, just like our language allows us to express ideas, I think the mathematics becomes a way where we can come to see things at a deeper level. And I think that's so true. Without language, like, how could we have this conversation? We couldn't share these ideas. And I think mathematics provides kind of the same backdrop.
And then, so what's in your title, this Introductory Mathematics, is basically your job as trying to teach this language also to non-mathematician, or this is for all, for mathematician and non-mathematician alike?
Yeah, so the way it's set up at Harvard is students come in and they choose from a range of different classes, and they also have a range of different interests and aspirations. So our introductory classes are really trying to meet the needs of all of our students. And so different classes will have, a different mix of students who are interested in economics or life science or math or statistics. And so we're really working actively to try and support students across the disciplines. And that's a good challenge because these students have different needs. So trying to identify what it is the students would really be empowered by is something that we work on. And so we have developed some classes that are specifically for students in particular domains. Like, students in the life sciences might need something different than the students who study economics. So, like, can we distill, like, what are the mathematical vocabulary or the skills in which students would need to step into these disciplines? And so thinking clearly about that is part of the work we're doing.
I don't remember if on your website or on the abstract of your talk, if I read about trying to somehow break through this resistance that some of the students have for mathematics. I'm curious on how you achieved that. So what is the main challenge and how we were failing to do that?
Yeah, I think students come to see mathematics through their many experiences in K-12, and a few negative experiences might then create a lens in which they're seeing mathematics as a disconnected set of facts that they have to memorize that are have nothing to do with the world they live in and really don't help them in a meaningful way. And I think they end up then having to take exams, and those exams become discouraging. And so they're seeing mathematics as this like critical yardstick that's used to measure them. And I think that creates a certain mindset about what mathematics is. But that couldn't be further than what the possibility is, right? Like really, mathematics is the power in modern science and social science and engineering, and like to step up to any of our real societal problems, you need a sophisticated mathematical lens, quantitative reasoning, statistics, modeling. But because of the experiences our students have, they don't see it this way. So it's like, how do we shift the students' mindsets by giving them new experiences? And it's not just the application, it's also an epistemology. Like you should memorize mathematics, and like it's these long lists to memorize. That I think a lot of students believe this, but really it's a way of thinking and inviting students into making connections, across topics and helping them make sense of the material. And seen as a sense-making activity is actually eye-opening for many students. So I think that's the work. It's like, how do we help students see mathematics as a sense-making endeavor that explains the world we live in? And it's a big challenge, but I think it can really set students up for success if they can see it that way.
And in this concept, I guess you try to apply active learning. What does that look like in a classroom?
Yeah, in my own practice, I think about kind of two dimensions to this. So there's the pedagogy, how we teach, and there's the what we teach, the content. So the content, we're trying to teach content that allows students to see how math can be applied to the world. But I also think it's really important to think about how we teach it. So how do we actually set up our classroom? What are our teaching moves? How do we foster the students' engagement in the class? And so, for me, a really important thing as a teacher is to be able to see what my students are currently thinking. Because if my role is to help elevate their thinking and their mental models, then I need to know where they currently are. So I need some sightlines into understanding, like, how are they thinking about the derivative? What is their current interpretation, and how can we make that more productive for them? And so I think active learning is a way to create these sightlines. It gives me a way to see the ways in which students might not really have everything pinned down, or how they haven't made a connection yet. And then that provides an opportunity to do that. I think it also sets the stage for the incredible power of social learning. Like, we learn by co-constructing with others. And so in active learning, students are able to discuss ideas, critique the reasoning of others, and be open to advancing their own ways of thinking because they're doing that with their peers. It's a very different interaction when you're talking to an expert. Then you almost take everything they say at face value, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, he must be right. Whereas when you're talking to a peer, you're really having to navigate if they've made a mistake or your own understanding, and you speak much more freely. And so I think, active learning allows for this social connection between other learners to really flourish. And so for these reasons, both the sightlines and the connections between peers as they're learning these things, I really believe active learning helps, and the research into it is very clear. Like, active learning definitely has better student outcomes. And interestingly enough, there's nice paper that shows that students don't like it and they don't think it's as effective. But when you look at the outcomes on exams, those students actually do perform better in active learning situations.
Do you know why they might not like it as much?
Yeah, I mean, I have a guess. It's challenging. Learning is hard. It takes focus. It takes cognitive resources. And it's like when I go to the gym, I don't love it. And if I'm in an exercise class, I burn a lot of calories because somebody's telling me what to do. And they've structured it in a way in which I'm going to get a good workout. And, at the end, I've benefited. But, if I just go to the gym and sit on my phone and watch other people on the exercise equipment, it might feel nice. I can say I went to the gym, but ultimately I didn't get the same benefit as really participating in that. And so, I think we can deceive ourselves sometimes by thinking like a clear explanation is going to help us, but really what's going to help us is working through an explanation for ourselves. That's going to create kind of the lasting knowledge. And, I think, myself included, like we get tricked into hearing an expert just give an excellent explanation about something and be like, oh, that was perfect. But then what's the lasting impact of that? It's probably not so robust.
I see. And continuing the gym analogy, because I'm curious about this, how do you get students to admit they don't understand a certain gym equipment thing? So admit that their understanding isn't as good as they would like it to be.
Yeah, I think this is a really important step in learning, and it really needs to start day one. Any expectations you want to set in your classroom have to start day one because so many norms are set up that day. It's really where many contracts are made about what students will expect and how they're going to interact. And so from day one, I let all my students know that learning is a two-step process. First, you get confused, and then you get unconfused. And you can't skip that first step because otherwise you haven't learned anything. And so my goal is that I'm going to confuse you in here every day, and then we're going to work together to get unconfused. And that experience of confusion should hopefully be inspiring. Like that should be something that really drives you to dig into the work. And I will help point out when you are confused. Like that's part of my role. And, I think it is a little unsettling. And the first day we always bring activities that we know are going to stir confusion. And so that way they can experience it. And on the flip side, we also want them to understand, what does it feel like to really have an explanation of something? So like, here's a basic example of that. I think many of my students, many students across the world probably know the area of a rectangle as base times height. But I think few would actually be able to explain why it's base times height. And then letting them, really feel what it means to understand is so important so that becomes the target. And so, with the rectangle, you can imagine like a grid where you now have, little rectangles and how many do you have? And it becomes a multiplication problem. And that sense of understanding should be the target understanding in everything we do in the future. And so helping them get a clear mental picture of like, what does it mean to really understand and set that as a target. And all this has to happen the first day because if you want to reset norms in week 3 or 4, there's just, a culture has formed in the room, the relationships are formed, and I think it's really hard to shift things. And so day one, you need to set these expectations.
And what would the activity look like? Take this example of the rectangle, for example. What do you tell the class? What should they do with that?
I see. So that's not right. I don't think the students are going to see it as confusing. That is an example of how they will have the sense of deep understanding. They're like, oh, I never knew that. I saw it as a formula, something to memorize. And now I see, I can actually make sense of that formula. Okay, so yeah, I mean, there are many examples of exercises that are confusing, but here's one in our multivariable calculus class. Day one, we're trying to get them to understand 3D geometry. And so here's a nice problem. Before class, I go and I put a little figure of a spider and a little figure of a fly in opposite corners of the room. And it gets dramatic because I point these out, and I ask the students, how far away is the spider from the fly? And, it depends. The fly can fly to the spider, but the spider has to crawl to the fly, right? So there are two different ways of navigating this 3D geometry. And, I think the fly's distance isn't so hard. Students are pretty good at that. But the spider's distance is a little more difficult to think about. Like, which path should that spider take? And this is a way for students to really get confused, and they start talking to each other. They, there's some good thinking that happens, and they don't have an immediate answer to this. So it's a good example of like being uncertain and working through it. And, it's a group-worthy task. I like this idea of group-worthy task from Alana Horn. They probably can't solve it alone, but between them they can. And then I also like this because I bring a three-dimensional box kind of representing the room, and I flatten it. And once it's flat, then the answer becomes very clear. And in multivariable calculus, oftentimes the strategy is to flatten the box, so to say, to bring it back to a calculus of one variable problem. And what are our techniques there? And then how do we expand that to 3 dimensions? So that's like one example of.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And this implies, I guess, that you must have a feeling for how to portion this struggle with confusing topics, and sometimes sprinkle a little bit of eureka moments in there for the students to experience this resolve, I guess.
Right, yeah, because I think the resolve is really important. That provides the sense of joy or satisfaction. But, it's not, I don't always try and get the resolve. I think there's actually something just about the productive struggle where students come to see the challenge of a problem. And so if they can see like, okay, there's actually something hard here, and I'm not sure I have the tools to resolve this right now. Now they're ready. They've built some mental hooks for them to hang new knowledge on, and they've created the intellectual need. So, it really depends on the pedagogical goal. Sometimes it definitely is to have them resolve it and have this eureka moment. But other times it's like for them to notice the challenge and need for new mathematical understanding.
And I guess probably getting used to be at peace with that, right? Because usually you don't like the sensation that you don't know and you don't know what to do, and you just get stuck, and you have just a new excuse to procrastinate. And instead you're getting used to the fact, okay, I don't know, but I might be able to know. It's just part of the process.
Yeah, that is a great goal. One constraint we have in our setup is we resolve everything in a single class. So in 75 minutes, that's kind of the amount of time the confusion can last. At the end of the class, we do want them leaving with like some resolve to this. And so it isn't probably until later classes where they can see longer periods, longer stays in confusion. But I do think there are some things that are really worth a long stay in confusion.
And I'm curious about something else also related to this. I was talking some time ago with, I don't know, maybe you know her, Fulya Kula here in the Netherlands.
Oh, yes. I got to meet Fulya at University of Twente.
Because her and Svetlana Dubinkina and other people, they are working on this introductory mathematics classes, pre-calculus classes, to get all the students to the same level. And a big part of what they were doing was also looking into how to keep track of the progress and be able to give effective feedback to the students so that they could reflect on this progress and keep building up their understanding. Is that also part of the way the active classes are structured, or perhaps the space between the classes?
Yeah, I mean, I talked with Fulya a little bit about her approach, and I love it because I think students benefit so much from clear feedback about where they need to invest time. And so if we can identify for students, like, where are the mathematical gaps that you can go and fill in so that you can step up to your next challenge, then they have like a really clear idea of where they should be investing their time. So we do this, we try and help students do this for themselves. One thing we believe is that students come to university with, from various high schools, from various countries, from various states. Like, their experience in high school is not the same. And so their learning strategies are also different, right? There's a wide variety of learning strategies. But here's the thing. We know that some learning strategies are more effective than others. And so we need to help students step into more effective learning strategies. So one thing that we try and help students with is that if they're studying for an exam, they shouldn't be reading the textbook again. They shouldn't be going over notes. They should be solving problems. And they should use these problems to diagnose where it is they still need to do work, and then they should actively work to resolve those difficulties for themselves. The challenge is, like, lots of students, they see the practice materials and they just read the solutions, and they think that's going to help them develop. But we know it won't. So I think we need to be very explicit with students, like, how do you advance, and like really trying to struggle through the problem and work it by yourself as much as you can, and then see just like the first line of the solution, like, okay, how would I get started? And then try and push on yourself. And then at the end, like, not just see completing the problem as the goal, but really taking a step back and thinking, what did I learn by doing this problem? And how, in the future, how would I recognize to apply these techniques? And I think developing these metacognitive strategies is important for students as they take agency over their own learning. And so, I think it is something that we're called to do, because we want to make sure that as students step into university and become kind of in charge of their own learning, they have effective ways of doing this.
So you said students tendentially do not like this active learning. Was that the reaction that you got from your own students as well?
Earlier in my career, it definitely was the case. I think then part of the challenge was students thought I was doing an experiment. They thought that I was somehow trying something new and unfounded, and they didn't want to be the subject of an experiment. They were there, to find success. I think as my career's developed and, I have ways to communicate to students about the importance of active learning, then I get buy-in a little quicker. And, I think students actually come to really appreciate the experience. One thing that's a barrier to instructors trying active learning is the end of semester evaluations, right? They're worried, like, okay, well, students like this, and if they don't, then I'll get bad evaluations. What will that mean for my promotion or, my continuation? And, I think if orchestrated well, students actually really enjoy an active classroom because they have a sense of why they're there. They're not just in a lecture where the information is flowing over them. They get a sense of like community. They meet friends. They get to dive into their own thinking. And so while there can be moments of resistance early, I think once you get more skilled at facilitating this, it ends up being, it's strange. My students, math is not the subject that they love. They're not at Harvard to do math. It wasn't their best subject in high school, maybe. Something else was. But they end up loving their math class because of this, I think.
Oh, that's beautiful. And what was your biggest surprise by doing this shift to active learning?
So my first semester teaching ever, I was teaching a lecture of 200 students. And I thought I was going to be a great teacher. Maybe that's a little not very modest, but I just thought I knew the math. I'm like a fun, energetic person. I could be a great teacher. And I was very excited about it. And the first semester was terrible. The final exam average was a 34%. And I just remembered feeling, how did this happen? And in particular, there was one student, and she would nod. She was my biggest fan, I thought, and she was like on board with everything because she was sitting there nodding at everything I said. Like, yes, yeah, I get it. I just, like, we made eye contact throughout like every lecture, and I was just like, Catherine's here, she's on board. And her score was below this low mean. And I was like, how could this happen? And so, okay, that is really what triggered me, kind of this investigation into pedagogy and thinking about like, how could I have done better? Because obviously that didn't go well. And I think this for me is the reason why I want these clear sight lines into my students' thinking, because I thought that Catherine really knew the material because of the body language I was getting from her. But it was clear only on the exam that she actually had no clue what was going on. And so I think, what has been, okay, so maybe it's unexpected, especially at the start, but like what I think is so exciting is the possibility to see students thinking and support them before the exam. And by structuring activities and where that's the goal, you really can get sightlines into this and then provide earlier support. So they don't students don't get to the exam and then fall off the cliff. Yeah.
And how do you see this in class? So they are doing their group activities separately, and you are passing through to check how it is going, to see how the discussion has developed, or they have like little assignment moments when they report to the class or they report to you or the TAs?
Yeah, this is a great question. So it really depends on the format of the classroom. At Harvard, I'm lucky enough to have small classes of about 25 to 40 students. And the rooms that I teach in, they have wraparound blackboards. So all students go up to the blackboards and work on activities. And then I can just like scan the room and see who's in trouble and go over and investigate and ask questions and support them in this. And so that's a very nice structure. At the University of Utah, where I taught before, I was teaching these big 200-person lectures. And so there, it was students sitting in groups working, and I would just run around the classroom, talking to different groups, and really trying to create. The other thing I've learned is learning can't happen unless students' attention is focused on the target. And so, if students aren't attending to the mathematical problem, there's no chance. So like if they're on their phone, if they're on their laptop, reading a news article or their email, like they're not just going to absorb something that's happening in lecture. That's not going to happen. It really needs to be an effortful attention. And so, in this big 200-person class, we had like a no tech policy. Everyone was doing the work. It really became like an exercise to run around this auditorium and really interact with the students. I made it a goal to learn all 200 students' names, which is really, it's hard. Wow. But I think once you know somebody's name, you could be like, hey, Josh, I see you on your phone. And, it's a sense of care. Like make sure that students realize that the reason you're calling this out is because you want this to be productive for them and for your shared community. And so I think it can look different in with different constraints, and everyone needs to think about like what's going to work in their classroom, in their context. Maybe you don't have wraparound blackboards, but you can get pads of paper, like these giant pads of paper, and you can put those up on the walls. And I've seen that done successfully. So it really matters. It really just depends kind of on like what your classroom looks like, how to do this.
Mini whiteboards, there's many solutions.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
That was very insightful. Thanks a lot. I'm curious also if a lecturer would like to start shifting their classes to a more active learning class. Do you have suggestion on where to start?
Yeah, I think it should always start with thinking about who your students are and how to support them in their goals. But there are some small steps to take. Framing a question for everyone to work on, and it's a small routine, but like think, pair, share is something where you have the students work on a problem individually, then they chat with the people next to them, and then somebody shares out. One thing I like to do, a little modification, is like as they're sharing in their partners, make sure that you're also inserting yourself into groups so that you hear how the students are approaching these problems, so that you're ready to sequence different students investigations, right? Like, you know that this group did something productive and this group did something unproductive and this group did something that actually wasn't the right answer but could be valuable for everybody to hear from. And then you can, instead of cold call groups or just pick on the few people who are volunteering, you can do what people call a warm call, which is like you've inserted yourself into their pair conversation and you're like, I would love for you to share this. When we get back together as a big group, I'm going to call on you. Mm-hmm. And you like let them know that's going to happen. And so it reduces their stress a little bit because they understand like there's actually something really nice that will benefit the community. And so like does that have to be your whole lecture? No. But like, could that be 15, a few of these throughout sprinkled, like 15 minutes in total? Sure. That's like a small step in towards creating community where students are working together and you getting these sightlines into the student thinking.
Okay, so one mystery I then have in my head, apparently this works, active learning works, but the ratings of professors when they try to apply it at once might go down, or they fear that it might go that way. What's hindering the whole body, I guess, to apply it all at once, so there's no real difference? Why doesn't everybody do active learning? I also think it's very natural for us to repeat the environments in which we were taught. So we think about what was inspiring for us, what did we really appreciate as students. I love that. I mean, I think about instructors in my own life who made such an impact on me, and I do try and channel their energy, and I think they're an inspiration, right? But the problem is that I shouldn't be teaching with a young version of me in mind, because not all my students are interested in getting a PhD in math. And if I think about a young Brendan as the mode in my classroom, then I'm missing a whole bunch of different students. But let's just say that I'm doing this, I'm thinking about that. Then as a student, I actually really loved a clear lecture. And I think many of us did. And so I'm going to maybe try and replicate that. But that isn't really aligned with what we see from the research literature on practices of promoting student success. So I think that's one barrier. It's like trying to replicate kind of the experiences we had. I think student evaluations is another. I also think there is some skill to facilitation, like that day one. How do you set up those norms? How do you build this positive learning community? And that's a very different role than how do I tell a compelling mathematical story, right? These are two, how do I facilitate a productive learning community versus how do I tell a compelling mathematical story? And I think research mathematicians, they might think of themselves as having the responsibility of telling a compelling math story. And so in some ways we need to change our conception of who we are as instructors and what our responsibilities are. And that is a hard change. I think that's actually really challenging. So you might actually be the leading figure for coming generations to take your example and I guess apply this in their.
That would be right. I would love if my students go on to become teachers. I've actually had that gift several times where my students will go on to become math teachers. I think that's really exciting. I also do, it's interesting. I do a lot of work with our graduate students, our PhD students who are going to become instructors. And I do a lot of hiring for teaching focused faculty. And more, we're seeing people who experienced an interactive classroom. And so it will be interesting. Like, what does it mean as people who've experienced active learning classrooms become PhD students and then become instructors? Like, they can draw on these meaningful experiences that were aligned with the research on supporting student success. And I think that does have a lot of promise to it. Yeah.
I can relate a lot with what you say, like thinking of these two figures of the storyteller and the facilitator. And it's very hard to be a facilitator if you don't have any experience of being facilitated on your own, right? If I think of myself having to structure an active classroom, I honestly don't know where to start because I don't have any experience with that beside maybe peanuts of experience in some teaching professionalization class, which is something completely different from having followed myself a whole course on that. But on the other hand, I agree that things are changing. Like also at our university, if you think Akin is doing inquiry-based learning, which is also a type of active engagement, right? Where the students are somehow writing their own lecture notes by filling in the gaps in the material. So yeah, I'm very looking forward to see how things will be changing.
So to wrap up the episode, I would like to ask one more question to you. I'd like to be a teacher one day, and I'm wondering, therefore, if you need something, a certain characteristic, to become a good teacher in the active learning method.
I love this question. I think an important part of teaching is we need to bring our own strengths into the classroom. So, some strengths that I bring into the classroom, I'm a very enthusiastic person. I have a lot of energy. I can take up a lot of space and command kind of this attention through that. But that's not the only way to become a facilitator. That's just how I do it because of some of natural strengths I have. I have colleagues who are incredibly thoughtful, more reserved people who I admire so much, and I wish I could do what they do in the classroom. They bring an intensity to kind of the questions they ask and the way they facilitate. And so they're bringing a very different strength. And it's all just keeping this goal in mind of how do we create a productive community? How do we help students get into groups and be able to share their ideas and work to build their ideas? And I don't think that, one personality is better suited or worse suited for this. I think it's all about how do we leverage our strengths to enact this. And so, okay, that said, like some of our grad students who I work with, when they're struggling or working to become better facilitators, depending on their strengths that I see, I will go send them to watch different colleagues of mine because it's easier to see kind of how people are marshaling their strengths that are similar to yours. But I think at the end of the day, just realize that whatever your strengths are, there is a way to become a productive facilitator.
Thank you. Beautiful answer.
Thank you so much for being here, also for arranging everything in such a short notice. And thanks, Anna. And thanks everybody for listening. And if you like this episode, please share it with your friends, and to the next one.